typical South African city looks like. It is, of course, a city that has monofunctional residential units of historically black townships where people who were of a darker skin on the basis of their race, color, creed, were located in the outskirts with inadequate access to not only municipal services, but tenure rights, commercial opportunities, and therefore access to the opportunities that the urban amenity provides. Our response has been that we need to create a city that is witnessing increased densities and intensity of land uses with the intention of restitching a city that is divided by design and restitching it into an integrated urban system that functions as one. The Corridors of Freedom project, as we title it, is a bold initiative that we announced in our State of the City address last year that has a number of concurrent objectives. These are, amongst others, directing future growth along transit corridors surrounded by high-density, mixed-use residential development, combating urban sprawl and create a more compact spatial form, addressing the legacy of apartheid planning, and ensuring that we create greater access to the urban amenity for residents and people locating in Johannesburg and use Johannesburg as a springboard for interface with the rest of the continent. Creating a more inclusive city where we can create better equity and equitable access to opportunities to live, work, and play and pray in the same environment. Reducing our dependence on private transport and in the process decrease our carbon footprint. As the city of Johannesburg, 87% of our electricity is generated through coal. And this is a reality that, in fact, we have to increase access to electricity as we get more and more people onto the grid, accepting that we've inherited a society where many did not have access to the most basic services like electricity, water, sanitation, and, in fact, even housing opportunities. Since 1994, we've worked on a program that ensures that not only do we increase access to electricity, but progressively begin to reduce the carbon footprint as a result of the energy that is being consumed. At the point at which we started measuring properly, we have been able to determine that through a number of initiatives, including demand-side measures undertaken by the City of Johannesburg, its residents and business, we've been able to reduce since 2008 the consumption of electricity per capita by 20%, and in real terms, in the past 2 years, by 4%. And we believe that this has had a major impact on the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from a demand-side point of view in the city of Johannesburg. We have implemented green transport flagship programs through, amongst others, the implementation of the Rea Vaya bus rapid transit system. This currently saves about 380,000 tons of CO2 emissions per annum, and once fully implemented, 6 million tons of CO2 will be saved by 2030. In addition to our public transport initiatives, the city also has a special program to explore greener fuel technologies. We've started a process to convert the city's vehicle fleet to operate on a dual fueling system, making use of biogas together with, or in a hybrid system with diesel and petrol. In future, we intend to develop and produce fuel filters, conversion kits for both public and private vehicles throughout the city. This contributing to economic generation, to economic development and job creation opportunities. Our adoption of alternative liquid fuel systems and or propulsion systems was informed by the need to balance the objectives of creating a sustainable environment, whilst at the same time creating employment opportunities and building the green economy in South Africa and Johannesburg in particular. Some of you have already traveled on our green buses during the site visits yesterday. These were the first two of what in fact is currently undergoing through a procurement process for the next fleet of metro buses to be on these green fuel systems. And certainly the conversion of our BRT fleet would further make greater impact from even the BRT itself. Yet I thought it would be important that as we talk about climate change, about sustainability, that we also talk about the reality that that has in the developing world on those most vulnerable, which are the poor in our cities. As Johannesburg, like many African cities and cities throughout the developing world, we are experiencing increased levels of migration and urbanization, largely because people have been impacted on by soil erosion and other impacts that have forced them to leave the rural areas and seek opportunity in the urban areas. For poor households, food costs account for up to 65% of monthly expenditure in Johannesburg. In Johannesburg, up to 42% of households in deprived areas are unable to have access to sufficient food and can be described as food insecure. Food insecurity being defined as those who go without a meal for at least 3 days in a month. So the question of balancing the action that we take in a sustainable way that acknowledges that in fact we have to address the impact of climate change together with in fact the impact of urbanization and urban poverty is very critical, and thus a comprehensive response that we've developed as the City of Johannesburg. The city's access to food and urban agriculture programs are already implementing climate change proofing initiatives in the city's food supply value chain. We of course accept that we are a city that emerges out of many disparate, racially defined, racially classified local municipalities. Johannesburg had in excess of 11 because as we incorporated Midrand and Modderfontein, we incorporated literally 13 racially defined and segregated municipal areas from 1995 with the integration of the first interim local government system that was established. That has meant that in communities that had access to greater opportunity for urban infrastructure with world-class infrastructure, these lived side by side with communities that literally did not have access to any form of infrastructure, whether it's water, sanitation, electricity, adequate public transportation, adequate telephony, and so on. It is thus that in fact in 1998, 4 years after the incorporation of the local government system, in fact 3 years, that Johannesburg experienced its first problem of significance, which was a financial crisis. We've had to turn the situation around, of course experienced, as we have shared with Mayor Paes and his colleagues in Brazil, the impact of the World Cup in the past few years. We've had to look at financial sustainability as a critical component of how we can advance the city. We have thus acknowledged and worked on a process of restructuring our finances to enable us to increase capital investment to address 3 critical areas in Johannesburg. The first being about the reduction of those communities that do not have access to basic municipal services, so addressing the backlog. The second being about the need to expand and replenish existing infrastructure to accommodate people and the needs of enterprise in Johannesburg. And the third being focused attention on economic infrastructure to support growth and development. This three-pronged approach, if I may say so, has said to us that we need to increase our investment in infrastructure. And I can say that when 2 years ago we announced the 110 billion rands program over 10 years, our capital budget was standing at 3.9 billion rands. We're able to move that to 7.6 billion rands in this year and to 11 billion rands next year to support the expansion and growth of the city. We are committed to ensure that this expansion is at the back of climate proofing and at the back of, in fact, renewable energy and alternative energy sources and more sustainable development practices. This would enable us to use the developments that take place here, including our Corridors of Freedom project, as incubators for sustainable practices and urban innovation, and we are on course and currently implementing these. In conclusion, I would like to welcome you all to the city of Johannesburg and extend a special word of welcome and acknowledgement to the outgoing chairperson of C40, who would continue to serve as president of the board of directors of C40, Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and of course congratulate him on his appointment as UN Special Envoy for the Secretary General on climate change and cities. I believe that this bodes well for local government and an acknowledgement by the UN system of the role that local government plays and can continue to play in mitigating climate change impact, but also introducing mitigating actions against the impact of climate change on communities and economies. Let me also take this opportunity to congratulate the new chairperson of the C40, Mayor Eduardo Paes, Mayor of Rio de Janeiro. I believe that his elevation and election as chairperson of the C40 bodes well for local government in a period that he will be hosting two important international sporting events that gives us and certainly his city the opportunity to showcase the work that local government does in dealing with problems ranging from urban poverty, food security, to the mitigation and adaptation actions with regards to climate change. So to him we say, we look forward to working this road with you, both towards the World Cup, the Soccer World Cup, and the Olympics, and believe that these events give local government the opportunity to showcase what it can do, and Rio will be the face not just of Brazil, but the face of local government throughout the world. I take this opportunity, therefore, to introduce and welcome on stage my colleague, Mayor Eduardo Paes.
Fellow mayors present here, C40 colleagues, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm so excited to be here in this fascinating city of Johannesburg. Since my arrival, I have constantly been aware of the positive energy surrounding this summit. This is the first time I'm chairing a C40 summit, and I'm honored to take on this mission. Yesterday we had very fruitful meetings of the board of directors and of the steering committee, but I know that the great mood of this event is due to the fantastic job that our hosts are doing, like last night at a wonderful dinner at the Apartheid Museum. Thank you, Mayor Tal. Thank you, Johannesburg. That was a great opportunity. Actually, Mayor Tal, mayors have been talking a lot about resilience. I know that many mayors that had the opportunity of spend last night dancing some South African music, they are showing lots of resilience, because they have the capability of dancing till late last night and being this morning here in perfect shape. I know that Mayor Parker from Houston is a resilient mayor. Ahead of us today are several plenaries and sessions where we'll be presented with projects, insights and proposals for us to demonstrate what our cities are doing and for us to evaluate what other cities' projects might benefit our own hometowns. I mean, we know that the report that is being launched today shows great examples of many cities, many C40 cities, all the C40 cities participating with lots of actions. We just heard from Mayor Tao the great achievements of the city of Johannesburg. These are achievements and examples that we can use in our cities, and it's amazing how C40 has become a global institution. I mean, we are now with lots of the examples, of the good examples of C40, as this report shows, the climate action in megacities. It shows that there are examples coming from the south to the north. I'm confident that this report, the Climate Action in Megacities report, which we'll hear today, will demonstrate our progress and will help us reflect on the next steps that we C40 mayors must take in order to further advance our objective of making our cities sustainable, inclusive and resilient. To achieve it, new commitments must be made, new partnerships must be sought, and new global political efforts must be done. Without further ado, I would like to call now on stage the mayor, the former mayor of New York, Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who has done an outstanding job on leading this organization and as mayor of New York City. He has accepted the invitation to continue with us as president of the C40 Board of Directors. In recognition of his work, he has been invited by the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to be his special envoy for cities and climate change. And this is a clear message that reinforces the leadership of C40 cities and opens up possibilities for both the UN and C40 to expedite the Sustainable Development Agenda. So let's give a warm welcome to Mayor Michael Bloomberg. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Eduardo, and good morning, everyone. I hope you had as good a time as we did last night. I think we've created a white wine shortage in Joburg. It is great to be here in this beautiful city, and anyone who has spent a freezing February in New York knows just how happy I am to be here. Actually, one of the nice things about being the ex-mayor is that nobody blames me when it's too cold or we have snow. And for those of you that check the forecast, they've had 3 days of snow in New York. I really feel bad for them. I did want to also thank Mayor Tao for hosting us this week, and thank all of you who have traveled so far to be here. Like many of you, this is my first visit to South Africa, and it's especially meaningful to me to be here now while this nation is united in remembering Nelson Mandela. I was lucky enough to meet Nelson Mandela a couple times during my time as mayor of New York, and it's something that I will always be glad for. And one of these visits, I gave him the key to the city, and then I had to admit to him that the key doesn't open anything. But he took it with good spirits, and it was the gesture that counts, I think. Seriously, thanks to Nelson Mandela and those working to build on his legacy, this nation is increasingly look to for leadership on the biggest issue facing our planet, and that is climate change. Under Mayor Tao, Johannesburg has been one of the most active and committed partners for C40, and Mayor Tao has done an excellent job of using this summit to build support for local climate initiatives and make them happen, including a project that is a close partnership with C40 over the last few months, and you're going to hear more about that later. We'll also hear later about other works happening to C40 cities around the world, from Beijing to Barcelona, from Lima to London. In the 3 years I've been privileged to serve as chair, it's been exciting to see the progress that cities are making and to see how far this organization has actually come. Let's make no mistake about it. Today's C40 is recognized as one of the world's key players in the fight against climate change. And our staff, our steering committee, and our board of directors have worked hard to execute the 5-part strategy for C40 that we announced in Hong Kong back in 2010. And the results really have been transformative. Today, C40 has a global governance and staff in 15 cities around the world. We've built strong partnerships with leading organizations like the World Bank and the World Resource Institute. We are now on sound fiscal footing, and we're fully funded through the next 3 years. And I did want to thank the Children's Investment Fund Foundation and the Realdania for joining Bloomberg Philanthropies as strategic funders of our work. It is great when the philanthropic community recognizes that if you give your money here, you get some results, and we are making the world better. Our member cities are working closer together and getting more done than ever before. We have restructured our programs around city-led networks that address common challenges and spread the best ideas. And today, over 80% of the C40 cities are participating in at least one of these networks. We've placed 5 regional directors around the globe to provide direct support to help cities achieve their goals. We've established performance-based criteria for membership, including the crucial first step of tracking and reporting emissions, so that being a C40 city really does stand for something. We've expanded our membership with a specific focus on the Global South, where most of the world's new megacities will be. As our organization has grown, so has our role on the world stage. At the Copenhagen Climate Change Convention back in 2009, cities were largely excluded from the conversation. Today, the international community is looking to cities, and especially to C40 cities, for leadership on climate change. That is just an amazing turnaround. And this week we have proof of that. We are honored to be joined today by Christina Figueres, Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was instrumental in drafting the original 1997 Kyoto Protocols. She really has made a difference, and she has been brought to the United Nations a clear focus on how we get things done rather than just sitting around and talking about what we'd like to do. Later today, I'm pleased to say she will be joining a panel discussion on the role megacities can play in confronting climate change and how cities and nations can work together to accelerate progress. And this really is a historical first step, and it's a powerful confirmation, I think, that the world is taking notice of the work C40 cities are doing. And as well it should. After all, if C40 cities were a country, together, we'd be the world's 3rd largest population and 2nd largest economy. We really do represent a very large percentage of the public, and that's going to grow with time. As we all know, 50% of the public lives in big cities, and in 20 years, something like 70% are projected to live in big cities. And although I'll be stepping down as chair, I'm happy to be honored to serve as president of the C40 board. I was also recently appointed by the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to be his special envoy for cities and climate change, and it's an honor to serve in that role. The Secretary General clearly recognized the important part cities can play in reducing emissions and building resiliency worldwide. And the impact cities can have on the ability of our nations to reach ambitious climate goals cannot be understated. In this new role, I look forward to working together with all of you to ensure cities make a meaningful contribution to the Secretary General's Climate Summit this September in New York, and to the global agreement that we need to see reached at the United Nations Climate Conference next year in Paris. This international recognition is a big step, I think, forward for our cities, and it's because of the work that all of you in this room and many others are doing. Today, we're shining a bright spotlight on the work that the release of Climate Action and Megacities 2.0, our update to the groundbreaking research we announced at the Sao Paulo Mayor's Summit in 2011. And that report, I urge you to read it. It includes a lot of very encouraging news. It shows that cities' actions overall are really confronting climate change and that the efforts that they have expended have dramatically increased, and that C40's efforts to help cities share ideas and spread success are working with powerful results. The report highlights that cities do not only act to prevent climate change, but they adapt to it, and it shows that mayors around the world are finding innovative new ways to use their executive powers to confront climate change. In a moment, we'll be taking through the report in greater detail by C40's Executive Director, Mark Watts, who I'm proud to introduce to you today. Mark, you should know, was formerly the Sustainability Advisor to London Mayor and C40 founder, Ken Livingstone. So Mark not only knows firsthand what it takes for a city official to be effective on climate issues, he's also played a major role in founding this organization. And as Mark describes our findings in our report, you'll see that we really have made remarkable progress since the last time that we met. This week is a chance to build on that, and I'm confident that we can. Our organization is larger, stronger, and more effective than ever. It will be in excellent hands under the new C40 chair, Mayor Eduardo Paes of Rio de Janeiro. Mayor Paes, as most of you know, has been a strong vision for C40's next chapter, and I know he'll be a great leader of this organization, and I'll be looking forward to continuing to work with him and with all of you on really the defining challenge of our times. So thank you once again for being here, and Mayor Tao, once again, thank you for your hospitality, and your staff has just been wonderful in putting together a great event, and the hospitality of this city is really something none of us will ever forget. So to all of you, have a good day, have a good 2 days, and let's get back to work. God bless.
Thank you very much, Mayor Bloomberg. And I'd also like to extend my thanks to Mayor Tao and his team for such a wonderful welcome to this summit in Joburg. And also on behalf of the whole C40 team, just to say what a pleasure it's been working with Mayor Tao and his team in organising this summit. My job this morning is to carry on where Mayor Bloomberg left off and take you through some of the detail behind the C40's Climate Action in Megacities Report 2.0. Could I have the next slide, please? So the Climate Action in Megacities report is C40's flagship research product. It's based on a biannual survey of all of our member cities, and 59 took part this time, and it analyses the efforts of our member cities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve urban resilience to climate change. It does a number of things. Firstly, it measures the number and scale of actions that each city has taken to tackle climate change across 11 different sectors. Secondly, it analyses the powers that the world's leading cities have to affect or influence climate change actions. Thirdly, it identifies the levers, the methods of implementation that cities use to deliver climate action, as well as the scale at which this action takes place, and I'll talk more about that a bit later. And through this analysis, we then are able to generate key findings that identify major trends across all of our cities and all of our geographies. Now, the big number from this report, as Mayor Bloomberg referred to, is a really positive one, that since we last surveyed our cities in 2011, the number of climate actions, different things that our cities are doing to tackle climate change has doubled, from around 4,700 to just under 8,100. And in the chart on your screen, you can see the count of total actions for each of the 11 sectors in which we measure. The black bars are the 2011 data, and the light blue, the 2013. And if you quickly glance at the screens, you'll be able to see that in every single sector, bar one, LED lighting, there's been an increase in action since the last survey, with the greatest gains in the bars in the middle of the graph, which are adaptation, water, and community scale development. Now, in part, the reason that action has doubled is because more of our cities took part in the survey this time. 23 more cities participated, which is a great success in itself. But the second number on the screen demonstrates that we don't have an increase in actions just because there are more cities participating. If you take a like-for-like comparison of the 36 cities that completed the survey in both 2011 and 2013, there's a 41% increase in reported action. And we're also seeing in this report that the scale of individual climate action programmes is increasing. The graph on the screen now is showing the actions that were recorded as pilot projects last time we surveyed in 2011, so they were just starting, and is now looking that 2 years later they're being delivered at a significant scale or even a transformative scale right across the city. And you can see that that's particularly true in relation to the first 5 columns from the left, which are building retrofit, adaptation, waste and transport, both private and mass transit, where a really significant upscaling in activity has occurred. Now, we all know it's not an accident that there's an increase in climate action in C40 cities, and that indeed that our cities are taking a leading role in tackling climate change, and that's because 98% of our cities say that climate change represents a really significant risk to their city. Indeed, looking across all of the actions, there are over 1,000 actions related to climate adaptation alone, making it the third highest of all of our sectors, which is a big change from where adaptation figured 2 years ago, indicating the increased seriousness of the climate risk. And just looking here on the graph on the screen, this is breaking down the top 5 actions within that adaptation sector, and you can see that steps to prepare cities for the inevitable shocks of climate change rank the highest: early warning systems, crisis management strategies. But I think it's interesting that the third there is tree planting, which is one of those actions that straddles both mitigation and adaptation, helping both to take CO2 out of the atmosphere, but also to help cities reduce the impact of the urban heat island effect. And it's illustrative of the fact that C40 mayors are both leading efforts to prevent catastrophic climate change, but are sensibly preparing for the dangers that are now inevitable because of the world's slowness in responding to the climate threat. Now, moving now to some of the organisational findings from this report, the key one really is that we can see in this data tangibly that sharing best practice between cities is really working. So the model that we have in C40 of providing networks where leading city government practitioners can share ideas and swap best practice is making a difference. And the work that we do, along with lots of the other great city networks and our many partner organisations, are providing a valuable forum in which cities can learn from each other to accelerate action, but also reduce the transaction costs associated with taking climate action. And there are a number of excellent examples of this: the increase in cycle hire programmes, LED lighting. One that stands out for me is that in the 2011 survey, we saw that 13 cities had implemented bus rapid transit schemes. In 2013, that number has jumped to 29. So a huge, huge increase. And we're seeing that right across the board. So sharing is working, but that's only true because of the leadership. If we could have the next slide, please. The leadership and willingness to be bold and innovative that is being shown by our mayors and deputy mayors and the many other city officials that are here today. But it's also because our mayors have the power to act. And indeed, one of the reasons that Mayor Bloomberg initially instituted the Climate Action in Megacities survey and report was to demonstrate just that mayors really do have the power to take action on climate change, which some commentators had doubted. So you'll see throughout the report graphs in every chapter, like the one on the screen here, which measure the proportion of assets and functions related to climate change in our cities over which our mayors have power to act. The one on the screen is from the waste chapter, which is an area where generically across all of our cities, mayors tend to have relatively strong powers, and that's reflected in the scale of actions. But I think equally importantly, that we're seeing that mayors are taking action even where they don't have significant power. Now, this is a slightly more complicated graph, but the blue line that you can see sort of faintly at the top, running from the left downwards into the bottom right-hand corner, is a measure of the relative power that mayors enjoy in each of the sectors that are listed on the bottom horizontal axis. And you can see, if you go down to the right, where we have energy supply and ICT at the end, the green bars are showing the scale of action in each of those sectors. So you can see in energy and supply in particular, quite a high level of action, but a relatively low level of powers enjoyed by mayors. So innovation taking place, mayors not being constrained by the formal powers that they have in many sectors. Information communication technology, ICT, is another area where power is relatively low, but action is increasingly high. An interesting fact in looking deep into the data here is that it's not quite as you might expect, that it's just the wealthy cities that are really taking action around being smart. So the highest per capita income cities, which are shown in the bar on the far right of the graph there, it's actually the cities with the middle income GDP per capita that are taking the most action in the technology and smart city sector. These tend to be the cities that are developing most rapidly, where economic growth is strongest, and perhaps where they're taking advantage in that development of the most recent technological innovations to be delivered in their city. And that's illustrated partly by the blue line on the graph there, which is showing the level of internet connectivity in those cities, and you'll see it's highest in those middle income ones. We can also see that whilst mayors are taking a huge range of actions right across all of the sectors, they're focusing where action makes the most difference. So one example, buildings, energy use in buildings accounts for 47% of total emissions across C40 cities. It's also where 1/5 of all of the actions that we measure, all of the 8,000 actions, 1/5 of them take place in relation to building retrofit. Now, this survey is looking at the action that's already taken place. This is not things that mayors are thinking about doing, it's what they've already done. But interestingly, we also ask questions about plans for the future, and actually the future looks quite similar to the present, albeit that the scale will be much higher. So it'd be difficult to read these two graphs, but take it from me, this is looking at the community scale development sector. The graph on the left is showing the top 5 current actions. The graph on the right, the top 5 future actions. They're exactly the same, albeit they're in a slightly different order, which tells us that our cities broadly know what they need to do to tackle climate change. The issue is how to ramp up activity and get the finance to enable them to do that. So, whilst there's huge opportunity for increasing scale of action, there are some sectors where we can see there's already a very significant scale being achieved. This graph, again, rather complicated. You need to look at it in the detail in the report, but is showing the different proportions of scale of action from pilot through to transformative in each of the sectors. The one we've highlighted is the waste sector with the box around it, where 56% of all of the actions being taken are already at the transformative scale. And the data also allows us to example not just what mayors are doing and the powers that they have to deliver that, but the levers that they're using. If we could go to the next slide, please. And in every chapter, therefore, you'll see the different levers that are used. And the story here is that there's broadly the same kind of mix of regulation and policy and financial incentives and disincentives and programs in most of the regions. East Asia stands out as quite different, where there's a huge preponderance of the use of regulation and policy above all other levers. So that's a quick run-through of the main findings from the report. I want to pause in moving to the conclusion, though, about why this data really matters to us. And the next slide is looking at the importance of the C40, which Mayor Bloomberg has already touched on, that the population in our cities is equivalent to that of the US and Brazil combined. We have the same amount of emissions combined of that of a country like Japan, and very interestingly, the collective GDP of the C40 cities is still greater than that of China, although they are catching up. It's been commonplace now actually, because of this, to talk about the importance of cities and city leaders in tackling climate change. But reflecting back a bit, that wasn't always the case. And indeed, going back to 2005, when I was lucky enough to be working in City Hall in London for Mayor Livingston and Deputy Mayor Gavron, who's here today, when they established the C40, one of the reasons that we did that at that time was precisely because hardly anyone else thought that it was important that city mayors should get involved in the business of tackling climate change. And indeed, the first summit was in London, was called to coincide with the G20 national leaders meeting in Great Britain, where climate change wasn't on the agenda and cities didn't figure in the dialogue at all. Thanks to all of our collective efforts, that story has completely changed today. And indeed, I don't know if any of you have read the book by the US academic Benjamin Barber called When Mayors Rule the World. Not if, but when mayors rule the world. And I can see a few mayoral heads nodding sagely with that. I'm not going to predict when that global dominance will happen, but what the Climate Action in Megacities report really demonstrates is that our cities are already showing real leadership across the globe in tackling climate change. So those are the key messages from the Climate Action in Megacities report. You can see the different chapters on the screen here. I can't stress enough that what myself and Mayor Bloomberg have talked about today is just the tip of the iceberg. If I tell you there are 1.7 million data points in this survey, you'll know you need to put aside quite a bit of time to plough through this report. We'll provide a hard copy to every delegation, and the report's available to download from the website from today. I want to end by thanking the fantastic team at the C40 who've produced this report, particularly Seth and Kerem and Brooke, along with my former colleagues, Arup, who are the consultants on the report, particularly Paula, who's here today, and Seth, as well as to the CDP for providing the portal through which all of the data has been reported. And lastly, I particularly want to thank all of our member cities and many of the people in the audience here who worked very hard to provide that data. So, to conclude this introduction, the data is showing us that unequivocally the pragmatic action that cities are taking to tackle climate change is having impact and is increasing. It's also showing us that there's huge potential for expanding the role of cities in climate change and breaking the impasse that exists at an intergovernmental level. Many of you have been around this area for a long time will say, yeah, but we knew that already. Indeed, we did. But what this report gives us is the data to prove it to anybody who doubts it. So we'll be making a great play of pushing this data out from now on. That very neatly leads us to our first panel discussion of this summit, which is focusing on the importance of data and measurement and planning in advancing city climate agendas. So I would like to invite to the stage, please, Mayor Paes of Rio, the chair of the C40, Mayor Parker of Houston, Mayor Røsland of Oslo, and Andrew Stian, the President and CEO of the World Resources Institute. So, Mayor Paes, if I can start with you as our new C40 chair. You've had a bit of a chance to look at the Climate Action in Megacities report and think about the data. What really stands out for you of interest?
I mean, there's so many figures. I mean, we could even make a joke here, say, look at page 426, the figure number. I mean, it's such an intense report. But the first thing I wanted to make about is that the report shows that 98% of C40 cities, they consider themselves at risk due to climate change. So this is not something that we could say. This is something that we really need to pay attention. But there are three main things that I would say on this report that can really call my attention, that mostly stood out to me. First, It's the power of cities. This was something that you were saying here. I mean, we've been looking at the action of nation states, and we know that there's too much talk. There's not much action. When you look at the quantity of actions made by mayors all over the world that belongs to C40 cities, it's amazing. So this is one thing that really this report shows. The second thing, and on my first speech here today, I talked a bit about that, is that how C40 has become a global network. I mean, not only because a South Global Mayor, it's becoming the chair of C40, but if you look at some of the actions, I'll give the example of the BRT. I mean, BRT was started in the Southern Hemisphere, in South America, in Curitiba. The mayor of Curitiba, Gustavo Fruit, is here today. It started in Curitiba. By the last numbers that we had, last figures we had in 2011, we had only 13 C40 cities with BRTs. Now we moved to 29 cities that introduced that. Let me give the showcase, make some propaganda of Rio. I mean, we're building, we already inaugurated one BRT. We're moving to 3 other lines of BRT. So we in 5-6 years, we're moving to 150 kilometers of BRT. So it's a solution created in south cities, in cities that are not very wealthy, they're not very rich, but they came out with some, I would say, original solutions to the problem of mobility of transportation. And so BRT is one of these examples that really shows that C40 has become a global institution. And the third thing, and really I'm not bragging about, not making any propaganda about Rio, is that some of the last figures you just showed about this median GDP cities are the ones that are most showing or showcase on issues concerning technology. And I really, this is something that I think it's a big challenge for us mayors. We've been seeing protests all over the world. I mean, there are different reasons for that, but I think technology, the so-called digital revolution, can really be alternative, not for the everyday life of the cities, for us how to manage cities, but mainly and also for the participation of the people. I mean, climate action is something that it has to be a cultural thing. I mean, obviously we can do lots of actions, lots of stuff, lots of public policies, but if people don't get it, if people don't understand the importance of climate action, of what we can do to make things better, and I think this using the technology, using the digital revolution, that will help a lot. So I think these are they are so great figures. I mean, we could be speaking about this report forever, but these are the 3 of the main things that really stood out for me.
Great, thank you. So we're seeing this real transfer from south to north as well as west to east. Andrew, World Resources Institute, real pioneers in the use of data and measurement in the climate change field. We gave you an advance copy of the report, so I'm going to put you on the spot as well. What stands out for you?
Well, thanks very much, Mark. Look, yeah, I am one of the few that have read every word of this report, and I would encourage you to do the same. Why? Because it is exhilarating. Because it shows this movement which is gaining steam. 8,000 actions across a whole range of sectors, from transport to energy to waste to adaptation to economic development and so on. And it also looks at sort of what are the instruments you've got at your disposal. You could have regulations, you could have incentives, you could have public procurement, or you could have projects. Who's doing what out there? Absolutely fascinating. Now, why does it matter? And by the way, in the World Resources Institute, we have staff on the ground in about 12 of the C40 cities, and then we work in many more also. And, you know, I can testify, actually, it's true what's in here. There is this sense of excitement. You go to these cities, your cities, and one senses that things are different now. Now, why does this matter? It matters because if cities don't grip the issue of climate change, we will fail to address climate change. And the C40 is demonstrating that it is gripping the issue of climate change. It's showing also that the mayors of cities are changing the way they think about things. They're very data-rich now in what they want. You think about an old-style mayor 40 years ago, a lot more intuition. A new mayor is like a CEO of a major corporation, data flooding in all the time. And C40 emphasizing data. And the fact this first panel actually has the theme of measurement is a great tribute to. Take Mayor Paes, for example. In 2010, you had a real serious extreme weather event. And I remember you said something like, we absolutely weren't prepared. We didn't know what's going on. Now you have operations center, you have 80 square meters of high-resolution TV screens, you've got 60 layers of data coming in, you've got 500 cameras feeding in. You are now equipping yourself to really behave differently. And C40 can spread that around and start changing things. But it's also extremely important, given that our national leaders at the moment need to be demonstrating more leadership. It is the mayors of the world that are closest to the action. And the fact that mayors are now leading is very good news, because the mayors are concerned about what citizens think. And citizens are saying, actually, we need a low-carbon future. Why? Not just because we're environmentally concerned, because we care about our economy, we care about jobs, we care about our children, we care about society. And so mayors, more than any other leaders on earth, are demonstrating that actually what's good for climate change is good for your economy, and so on. And so there is a parallel exercise going on, by the way, called the Global Commission on the Economy and Climate. Mayor Parker is actually part of that Global Commission. And it's asking the question, how do we move from where we are today to where we need to be, and how do we do it in a way that promotes jobs and the quality of life? Cities are absolutely at the center of that, and it's a real pleasure to read this report. And I encourage you, don't just read the executive summary. Read the whole thing. It's like waves of action sort of flow over you. So you probably won't read every word, but read as much as you can. Thanks.
Wonderful. I think that's as good as an endorsement as we're going to get. So I'm going to move on from the report itself now. And let's think a bit more. I'd like to discuss around the role of the use of data and planning in each of our member cities. So, Mayor Parker, how are you using data? How are you using planning to deliver climate actions, but also the broader benefits to health and lifestyles in your city?
Well, right in the theme of today's talk, in order to manage change, you really have to measure what you're doing, and starting with a benchmark. So I'll go straight to the bottom line. In the last 7 years, we have reduced our greenhouse gas emissions as a municipality by 26%. I'm pledging today that in the next 2 years, each of the next 2 years, we'll reduce it another 5%, for a 36% total reduction. Hold me accountable. That's what mayors do. And we've done it across, we had to do that across all major areas. It had to be in energy efficiency, it had to be in transportation, and it had to be in waste management. Now, any of you who have been to Houston know that we are a hot and humid city, and about 60% of our greenhouse gas emissions comes from buildings and industrial uses. We have a large petrochemical complex, and we use a lot of HVAC there. So we started first as a municipality with looking where we purchase our energy, and we are the headquarters of the world oil and gas industry, but we are the largest municipal purchaser of renewable energy in the United States. 50% of what the city uses is renewable in the heart of the oil and gas industry, and that is not incompatible. So, big step forward there. But we've also, as a city, made the decision to benchmark our buildings. So more than 300 city facilities we have done complete energy analysis on, and we can, many of them we've created individualized energy emissions plans for. We have retrofitted 21 buildings, or built 21 new green buildings, but a number of retrofits, including significant historical buildings in the city of Houston. And so we have demonstrated to the citizens of Houston that we can preserve our history, but also do it in a way that is environmentally friendly. In the transportation area, we have bus rapid transit. Yes, that's we're constructing actually our first bus rapid transit, but we are about to complete 3 new lines of light rail. We are tripling the size of our light rail system. A third of our bus fleet is hybrid diesel vehicles. And we're doing something interesting in that we're doing a white paper exercise for our bus system. And by that I mean bus routes are where the bus routes have traditionally evolved. And after many years of operating a bus system, we've stopped and said, if we could design it from scratch, where would we put our bus routes? Not where have they been, where people are used to them, but let's optimize the system. And I think that's going to be very exciting. And then the third area of waste management, in my tenure as mayor, we've gone from 2% recycling, which is embarrassing, to 20% recycling, which is still embarrassing, but much, much better. But thanks to an innovation grant from the Bloomberg Foundation and the City's Challenge, we are hoping to prove technology that will allow us to commoditize the entire waste stream. A one-bin solution, instead of relying on inefficient human beings to sort their waste into recyclables and the residual, to commoditize the entire waste stream and mechanize the process. And so we are using technology and trying to push the cutting edge of technology out there.
Great, thank you very much. Moving now to Mayor Røsland. I've been lucky enough to do a little bit of work in your city, and I know that you have very dedicated climate plans and reporting, but you were telling me earlier that that's now extending beyond the city reporting on what it's doing in its emissions, but engaging the business community and wider stakeholders. So it'd be interesting if you could just tell us a bit about the depth and breadth of the climate planning process in your city.
Well, thank you. And I am looking so much forward to studying this report, because I think it's a wonderful way for all of us to get ideas and to also see what actually works. And doing all this work we are doing to promote climate change reduction in our cities, it's of course important to us to also emphasize that we do not have unlimited resources for different tasks. So we need to know what works in order to reduce the risk. We also don't have unlimited trust in the population, or voters, as we call them in my profession. So we also need to see that what we are trying to do actually works. In Oslo, we do, as I imagine many cities do, we put out a report like this every year, where we state how we are working on climate and environment in the city, at least the public part of the city. But in order to make a real effort, you also need to include other parts of the city. So we have put together what we call Business for Climate, where we invite different local business and companies to join our climate work. And they signed a pact where they are committed not only to helping us reach the city's target, reduced by half by the year 2030 and become climate neutral by the year 2050, but they also need to report to us on how they are working on these goals. And what we have seen since we started this in 2010 is that we now get specific environmental and climate policies from the different companies that have joined it. 93% of the different companies joining the Business for Climate scheme now report to us on their work, and they report on their targets. And we try to promote every year, increasing the number of companies, increasing the number of businesses taking part in this, because it enables us not only to make policies for the public part of the city, which we control at the City Hall, but joining together with the rest of the city in order to make the city reaching our goal. So, but the business community is very eager to join this. They see that they save money, which businesses like to do, and it also helps them in promoting a modern business community and modern companies. So working together with them also makes us measure and also reporting better than we perhaps used to do.
Continuing on that theme on how the use of data and measurement enables you to deliver services more efficiently, but thinking specifically around the climate change agenda, Andrew raised the point, Mayor Paes, about the terrible floods that occurred in Rio a couple of years ago, and your response to that. And obviously the population's immediate response is they want action from the mayor. They want you to get them back into housing, to look after the people who've been hurt, etc. But you've also done something radical in Rio in setting up a long-term policy of using data and measurement so that you're better prepared for the future. Perhaps you can tell us a bit about that, but also how you balance those two things, the desire for immediate action with the use of measurement and data and planning.
I mean, I'll go back to the point that I said. I mean, even if you look at a city that has a wealthy city that has all the money of the world, I mean, we never have the money enough to do everything we want. So, I mean, I think measurement it's needed for us to get to know our vulnerabilities, and when you know that, you can prioritize. So, I mean, let me try to explain that by giving an example. I mean, Rio, from my city, Rio is a city that's full of mountains, hills. There are the favelas. Most of the favelas are spread around these hills. And, I mean, it's historical in Rio. We are in a tropical country. On summertime, there's lots of rain. And we have these big floods and landslides, which almost every summer in the history of Rio, they have been killing people. So, using data, measuring, using technology, I mean, what we could do was analyze where there are some areas that we know there are more risky areas, but with this data we could analyze where were the most dangerous areas, the high risky areas, and put up a plan. I mean, when you get this measurement, when you get technology, when you work together, when you get the almost 100,000 layers of information that you get from this operation center, when you gather everyone, just not the layers of information, but the departments of the city, you can act much better. So in the short term, what you will do, I mean, you get the radar, you put sirens in these poor communities, in the favelas, and when you have the information, the data that the rain is going to be a hard one, so you tell people, okay, you leave your home because it's going to be probably a landslide there. That's the short term. On the long term, what you need to do, and this data helps you a lot, is do constructions that can, or you have to take these people from these favelas or parts of it to certain areas of the city where they will be more protected, or you can do constructions that will protect the landslide. So this all, it's something that you can only do, and I mean, I'm talking about a city that has 450 years, and this has been a historical thing. We only found a way, or at least we have a goal, at least we see a light at the end of the tunnel when we put data together. When we started measuring things, that's when we could make a plan for tomorrow, and then that's when we could make a plan for the day after tomorrow. So that's what we try to do in Rio.
So, Mayor Paes, I've seen your data analysis center, and it's fascinating. How do you translate that information to your citizens? Do your citizens now understand that you have this data, and when you say, hey, you need to evacuate, do they respond?
And that's a very interesting question and debate, because it's not even easy to translate this information, this data, inside the city departments. I mean, it's amazing when you put them all together, when you get the several layers of information, it's amazing how if you don't push people, we got a geek unit there, a team of people working with this big data. And it's amazing how even the departments of the city, they don't have the culture of using the data that comes from the other department. So if it is a challenge to do that inside the city, employees, can you imagine how it is to get to people? So when you have something that is more specific, like landslides, when you have a big study showing with good data that they are on high risky areas, that's easy to tell them. So you can make a plan and say, okay, if the rain becomes that hard or that high, we're going to play a siren, then you need to know that you have to go to a certain place. But when you need to talk to the whole city, like in the morning in Rio, if you have a big flood, if you have lots of rain, and you have to tell people don't leave home, stay at home, this is something that technology helps. We use lots of social networks. Our traffic system is we're using Waze formally all the time. We use lots of Twitter, we use lots of these social networks, but it still is a big challenge. I mean, how can we get this data? How can we get this information to tell people what do they have to do? And how can they can be convinced that there are things that we can do? I mean, bears are always blamed for everything. We are guilty of every problem. But it's also, this data help us kind of, telling people, okay, there are some things that you can do. I mean, government, public officials, they can get some of the things done, but there are some things that you citizens can also do.
Sorry, Mayor Røsland first, then Andrew.
I just think that the question Mayor Parker poses is interesting in many aspects, because how do we communicate with the inhabitants on the different schemes we are trying to achieve? And listening to Mayor Paes, I thought about when we introduced our new waste management system in Oslo. We had to convince people to start sorting their wastes, food waste, plastics, etc. And apparently it shouldn't be that difficult, one should think. But it is. And one of the challenges is that some of the food waste, what goes where? And that wasn't obvious. So we made signs which people could hang up on the kitchens with pictures of different things that they could perhaps be wondering about. But then we found out that didn't help neither, because many of the people in Oslo don't speak Norwegian or don't read Norwegian. So we had to do it in 7 different languages. But then it worked. So now we have information on this in Arabic, in Polish, in Urdu, and of course English, and also Norwegian. But the smartest thing was that we also put pictures, so the children can do it, those who can't read, and they can also support. But I think the fundamental question is, when we get all this data in the city halls and in the different authorities we have, how do we make sure that what is complicated for our knowledgeable people working on it also get comprehensible for the people who actually need to do the work? And I think that is also something perhaps a network like C40 could work on, communications with inhabitants.
Look, we're still on a journey with regard to data at cities. We don't yet have a consistent way of measuring greenhouse gases from cities, but we're about to have one, and the C40 deserves credit. 10 years ago, individual companies were reporting greenhouse gases in lots of different ways. And so the World Resource Institute, together with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, worked very hard together with businesses to reach an agreement. And now 80% of all of the companies on the top 10 stock markets in the world report using truly consistent measures of greenhouse gases. That's companies. We're not yet there with cities. But what we do have now is a pilot system for cities on greenhouse gas reporting. And we're hoping by the end of this year, there are 35 cities at the moment piloting this. There are 60 cities that are committed. And by 2016, we hope 1,000 cities will be reporting consistently. Now, why does it matter It matters not only because city mayors are able to ask the question, okay, I'm doing all these 8,000 measures, but what will it actually do to my overall greenhouse gas emissions? But beyond that, it enables you to ask the question, what does each individual measure, what's it going to deliver? And so for the next C40 action report, 2 years from now, we not only need the 8,000, but by then it'll be 16,000 measures. We need to say, okay, what is that going to do in a consistent way to the overall battle against climate change? And here's the point then. Of all of these 8,000 measures, on average, about 130 per city, which are the ones that have the best rates of return? Because some of these measures actually are quite cheap to implement, so it's good just to get on with them and do them. Others actually, for a mayor, it's a big decision. You've got to put serious money into a measure, and the question is, what will you deliver? Not only in terms of greenhouse gases, what will you deliver in terms of jobs and competitiveness? And this is a real journey we're on, and I believe for C40 and for institutions like the World Resource Institute, it's a great opportunity to work together. For example, bus rapid transit. I mean, when Curitiba introduced this, really it was just a good idea. Now, in 150 cities around the world, bus rapid transit is working. The other thing that we now know is this is great for your economy. We've got detailed assessment. In Latin America, thanks to Mayor Paes and other leaders, the fact that we now have bus rapid transit, deaths and injuries have declined by 40% on the routes of bus. That's just one of the many benefits that it brings. So what we need to be doing now in the next 2 years, which is a critical 2 years, get better at measuring, get that measurement to citizens, but also figure out the costs and the benefits. Because the more we're learning, the more that the measures that these leading mayors here are introducing will be demonstrated to be good for the planet and good for their economies.
Can I... one of the challenges for me, I don't talk about climate change when I make these decisions and roll them out to the citizens. We don't talk about greenhouse gas emissions. It's sort of like Mayor Paes' problem. We talk about the bottom lines. We talk about the direct impact on our citizens. And the messages around what we do to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions are also economic messages. And I think it has been much more productive for me to make the economic arguments. We have about 2,500 signalized intersections in Houston, and we changed all of the incandescent bulbs in those traffic signals to LED bulbs. And I made the pitch to council and to the public that we're doing it, we're doing it to save energy. But more importantly, we discovered that because those light bulbs last longer, the human capital involved in replacing those bulbs gives us an almost immediate rate of return. And so when I go out and talk about why we're doing it, I don't talk about we're reducing our energy consumption. I talk about the fact that it saves the city $3.6 million a year because I don't have to replace light bulbs as often. Respectfully, when we start talking about greenhouse gas emissions to most of our citizens, their eyes glaze over. We have to couch our messages in bites that our citizens can easily grasp and relate directly to their own lives.
Let's stay on that subject because it's clearly a really critical one for all of our cities. And indeed, C40 has a green growth network, and one of the big issues that's been discussed in that network is how can you measure the economic benefit of actions that are implemented primarily for an environmental outcome, but clearly do have, as you've described, Mayor, some significant economic knock-on benefits. How easy is that to do, Mayor Røsland? How do you manage to make that connection? And perhaps thinking about this report, how valuable is it to have the comparative data, seeing what other cities are doing and how they're measuring?
Well, I think. Try this one. Excellent. Recycle. I think what Mayor Parker is talking about now is also very important, and we have a good example in Oslo, which I use. We have an elder center, where we changed the way they heat it. You know, Oslo it becomes quite cold in the winter, so we need to heat things.
I wouldn't know anything about that, actually.
It's minus 15, 20 degrees sometimes, so it's cold. But we changed the way it heats, and we reduced the energy consumption by 60%. That saves the city 1.7 million Norwegian kroner, which is 170,000 pounds, British pounds a year. And even though I think it's important that we save energy, I think to many people to save money is as well, it may be even more important in order to make it work. And it's not very difficult to manage, to measure this, because the electricity bill falls. So what we used to pay for in electricity, they can now spend on providing better care for their citizens. And if you think of, we did this in one senior citizen facility, we are going to do it in more, but we are going to save enormous amounts of energy doing it, 60% on all of these facilities, but we are going to save money. And I think that is also important to communicate to the public and to people who want to do this. And we have a scheme in Oslo where private citizens wanting to change their heating system in their house can get some financial benefits from the city in order to do that. And we can then also show them that in the long term they will cut energy consumption, they will reduce climate emissions, and they will save money. And we will help them do that.
And then just make a comment, because I think what Mayor Parker said here is like, by the end of the day, people don't understand about this carbon thing. I mean, this is, when they hear about carbon, they remember of their, sorry about the chemistries here, but their terrible chemistry lessons during school. So that's what comes to their mind. So when we talk about the way they can save money, the way that their lives get better, that's how you can really, and this is a big issue that I think C40, when we make a report like that, when we measure things, when we put things out so clearly, even if you don't read the whole report, but if you really read the executive summary, then you can make yourself understandable. Obviously, we're going to come to a point, and that's a remark here, just a joke, but I could not resist. I mean, C40 will come to a point that Oslo will send some cold weather to Rio, and Rio will send some hot weather to Oslo. Then people will really love us when we get to that.
And connect.
Yes, completely.
So, Andrew, can I just ask you, I know you want to come in on one thing. I want to maybe just extend what you're going to say, because what's interesting here, we're hearing very easily and freely a number of great examples from 3 different cities about economic benefits, social benefits derived out of climate policies, whether they're called that or not. But I certainly know, just coming out of a consultancy role, it's when you try and gather that evidence together, it's rather hard to do so at an international level. And it's one of the reasons for that. You talked earlier about the GPC and trying to get a standardized method of measuring emissions in cities. It's even harder to get a standardized methodology for how you measure economic benefit of environmental policy in other cities. So as part of your answer on what you wanted to say, I'd like to, what can WRI do to help institutions like C40 in our cities? What's out there? You mentioned the new commission around the economy and climate change.
Yes, today actually the Commission on the Economy and Climate, which is going to report in time for Ban Ki-moon's Head of State summit in September. Today they're putting out a request for evidence through the C40 most immediately, and today that will be provided to people in this room. And what it essentially asks is, look, as leaders of the megacities in the world, you're making decisions, and as Mayor Parker and the other mayors have said, you don't make them because citizens really care drastically about reducing greenhouse gases. You make them because it's good for the citizens. To what extent can we build a case that actually there are economic, social, and competitiveness gains from moving towards a lower resource economy? There's been a revolution over the last 10 years in understanding how resources are used in the economic process. It turns out that the GDP we generate in the world uses far more inputs than we need to in order to generate the output. So, for example, we use much too much energy. The IMF just came out and said we pay $2 trillion a year to subsidize people to use too much energy. What the cities are doing now through these incredibly innovative energy efficiency programs are motivated primarily because that's good for your city, it's good for your citizens, they're going to have more disposable income, but it also has this massive gain in terms of greenhouse gases. Almost a half of everything we need to do by 2030 on climate change can be done for free in a way that benefits the economy, benefits jobs, but we need to build a case for that. And so I think these are very exciting times for all of us, but particularly for cities, because more than anywhere else on the planet, this can be demonstrated to be win-win. Now, at the end of the day, I'm not saying that you don't need to make tough decisions. You are going to have to allocate resources, but instead of thinking them as costs, those are investments in jobs, investments in technology, and so on.
Unfortunately, we're starting to run out of time, so I just want to bring it down to quick final comments, and I want to come back to the Climate Action in Megacities report itself. One of the things that it does is provide comparative data across cities and regions. And I'd just like to hear from the three mayors very quickly, starting with you, Mayor Parker. Is that useful? How will you use that, having that comparison between you and other cities?
We're constantly trolling for good ideas from other cities. And if another city can experiment with something and make the mistakes and perfect it, and then I can go in and snatch that up, it's not stealing when you get it from one of your peer cities. And so we do it all the time. We find this very, very beneficial.
Great, thank you. Mayor Røsland.
I think this is not my day. We try again. I think one of the great benefits is that we are able to share and steal. And from a small city like I represent, to see what the real megacities in the world manage to achieve, we can sort of sit in our city hall and say, if they can do it, we should be able to do it too. And if London can arrange door-to-door action, having people recycle their waste, if they can do that in a city like London, it should be possible to do it in a city of Oslo. So we stole the idea and arranged the same thing, and have done it with the inspiration from London and from the C40 network.
Well, that's the beauty of C40. I mean, C40 has become strong because the trade, the exchange between cities have become strong. Then this report shows that. I mean, when you really involve cities that really represents all over the world. I mean, there are 3 new African cities joining C40. We approved in steering committee meeting yesterday. When you really get this data together, and having data together is when you come out of the meetings where people talk a lot about philosophy, ideas, and not action. I mean, when I say that's the beauty of C40 is because that has a lot to do with mayors. I mean, I wish I could be a mayor forever. In Rio, you only can have 2 terms. At least I don't have elections every 2 years, as Mayor Parker does. I mean, that must be terrible. But the thing about C40 is that you measure data, you see action, you exchange good experiences, and that's something that we're going to keep pushing. That's great Mayor Bloomberg's legacy as chair, and we're going to keep pushing in the next few years. I mean, let's get more data, let's get more measurement, let's get more information, let's exchange more experiences that cities in different areas of the globe. And it's amazing when you have an idea that it's created in, let's say, in Johannesburg, in South Africa, and London starts using it. When you have an idea that's created or developed in Rio, and then Oslo is using it. So that's the beauty of C40, and that's how we're going to keep moving.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for what's been a fantastic session, and that was a wonderfully positive note on which to end. I think you'd all like to join me in thanking our panel, Andrew Stier, Mayor Parker, Mayor Røsland, and Mayor Paes.
Ladies and gentlemen, and that's how we come to the end of this first session. It's time now to enjoy a coffee break. And please note that our program will be resuming at 11 a.m. Thank you very much.
And then suddenly you're breathing underwater and that God exists, 'cause here it is, this velvet underground of beauty and serenity, and all the bubbles moving overhead like mercury in slow motion. And your smile, and your smile, and your smile, and your smile, and your smile. Woke up in a dream, still waiting. Warm wind hits me as I step outside. Sunshine burns my skin. I'm melting. Sweet strong coffee and your smile. Purple sunrise, orange sunset. Drinking, talking in slow hazy nights. We jump overboard to the darkness. Laughter, music, and your smile. Being here has blown my world apart. Now everything has changed, and the dream that seemed impossible is happening. It's so easy. Ooh, sunshine, laughter, music, and smile.
Our sovereign governments or national sphere of government and how that interfaces with the United Nations system.
So some key figures from home and abroad. What sort of points or issues will be up for discussion during the course of the day?
There's of course been issues about creating adequate platform for local government where the action takes
And then
place.
suddenly you're breathing underwater and it's fine. And you feel so very honored to be here and so alive. All the things you've ever feared and prayed are here around you. And I know for sure that God exists, 'cause here it is, this velvet underground of beauty and serenity, and all the bubbles moving overhead like mercury in slow motion. And your smile, gravity and all the bubbles moving overhead like mercury in slow motion. And your smile, and your smile.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we ask you to settle, please take a moment to turn off or silence all mobile devices. If you need translation, the channel information is on the screens ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, this session is about to begin. Please, if you could start settling. And please take time to turn off your mobile phone or silence it. And if you need translation, the channel information is on the screen that's ahead of you.